This may come as a shock to you, no pun intended there. But today I'm going to be removing my Fox 2.5 Race Series shocks on my Tacoma. And here it is. My coilovers out now. A little sad. Hey guys, it's Chloe. Welcome back, or welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be really exciting because we are installing brand new suspension on my Toyota Tacoma TRD Off-Road. Now, I do want to say, for those of you who have been following me for a while or following my channel or saw my recent video where I actually removed my suspension setup, you might have been a little bit surprised. My old suspension setup were Fox 2.5 Race Series shocks for both the front and rear of my truck. I love those shocks to death. They outperform my OEM ones both on and off-road. They've survived a baby jump in the desert. They're just fantastic shocks. So if you're wondering why I'm removing them, well, basically, Fox recently just came out with their 2.5 Performance Elite shocks for the Toyota Tacoma. These are brand new shocks they've just introduced. They're completely redesigned. They're valved and tuned specifically for the Toyota Tacoma, and they've got more features than my old shocks had. So for these new Performance Elite shocks, there are remote reservoirs in both the front and rear shocks, which is really exciting because I didn't previously have those on my front shocks, and you guys will hear me talk about this so much in this video because I'm most excited about it. But all the shocks come with dual speed compression, or DSC. I'll talk about it a little bit more in this video, but in a nutshell, DSC basically allows you to make fine-tuning adjustments to your shock depending on what kind of terrain you're going on, what speed you're going at, and how you want your ride to be. So you can dynamically change the way your shock rides on the fly. That is super exciting to me. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to install these new 2.5 Performance Elite shocks in both the front and rear of my truck. I'll be talking about some of their features and why I went with these shocks, and I'll even do a little bit of comparing and contrasting these new 2.5 Performance Elite shocks by Fox to my old setup, also by Fox, the 2.5 Race Series shocks. Yes, if you guys can't tell, I really love Fox. So we're gonna get into the install soon, but before that, I wanted to give you guys my exact setup, what exact shocks I got, whether I lifted my truck more or not. So yeah, basically in the front, you can get the Performance Elite for the Toyota Tacoma from Fox with the ability to get anywhere from a 2 to 3 inch lift. And if you don't know, in the 3rd gen Tacomas, about 2 inches of lift will give you a leveled stance. So I went with their 2-inch coilovers, which straight out of the box come adjusted to give you an exact leveled height in your truck. However, you can also get the 2 to 3 inch version where you can basically adjust the preload color to give you as much or little lift as you want to accommodate whatever setup you may have. Now, height-wise, this was the exact same as my previous setup. On my previous setup, I basically adjusted the preload color to give me a leveled stance in my truck, so nothing really changed in that respect. For the rears with the Performance Elite, you can get shocks that will accommodate anywhere from a 0 to 3 inch lift. Again, I was just going with a leveled lift, so I went with the 0 to 1.5 inch lift rear shocks. But again, you could get Performance Elite rear shocks that can accommodate your Adelie or blocks or anything that's giving your truck lift. So here is the old and the new coilovers side by side, and surprisingly, there's actually a few differences. Fox did a lot of work in redesigning this new Performance Elite shock. So obviously the shock body width is the same size on both of these shocks. Both are 2.5 inches, which is an upgrade over the OEM Bilstein ones that come on the TRD Off-Road, which are, I think, like an inch shorter if I remember. Either way, that helps with cooling, and so does this external reservoir on this new shock. So these old ones didn't actually come out of the box like this. I actually adjusted them pretty much to the max to get me that leveled lift. So this is like their adjustment collar. This is how the Performance Elites come out of the box, pre-adjusted for you. So this should give me 2 inches of lift, and actually the adjustment on this side, which is the driver's side, looks different than the passenger side, because if you guys don't know, Tacomas kind of lean more towards the driver's side. It's heavier, there's the gas tank. The lean on the Tacomas is totally real, so that's why. But either way, these will give about 2 inches of lift, and this is how much I adjusted mine to give me just around 2 inches of lift on my old setup. The shock body length is significantly shorter on these newer shocks. And another distinguishing difference is that these shock bodies are made out of aluminum, whereas these ones on the race series are made of steel. You know, there's pros and cons to each. Steel typically is a stronger material, but aluminum dissipates heat better, which is really important in shocks. It's also lighter, but yeah, that is another difference. They really did redesign this lower shock bucket. I mean, this piece right here is all round, whereas this one isn't. I thought that the reason that there was a little bit of like a spacer here was to get clearance from the sway bar. It's interesting because this shock doesn't have that, but I'll see when I install them how close the sway bar gets. And another interesting difference I found was in this top hat design. So on these old shocks, there were the 3 bolts and you actually threaded them through the top. And with the new Performance Elite, there's actually bolts that are threaded from the bottom, and then there's just these nuts and washers that you tighten from the top, which is interesting. So yeah, even though these both came from Fox, these are 2 totally different coilovers. When you get Fox Performance Elite Series shocks, right out of the box, they come valved specifically for the Toyota Tacoma to maximize performance. They're supposed to give you great control. And what I love about this series of shocks is that every Performance Elite series comes with DSC, which again, I'm really excited about. Guys, I've had these shocks on for less than a week now, so I want to wait for a future video to give an in-depth review of DSC. But to show you guys an idea of what DSC is all about, basically there are 2 adjusters on the external reservoir, the low speed compression dial and high speed compression dial. They pretty much do exactly what they sound like. For the low speed dial, there are 10 clicks where you can adjust from soft to firm compression dampening, and you would adjust this for low speed movements like body roll, cornering, or just anything that would affect slow suspension movements. For the high speed dial, there are 12 clicks from soft to firm compression dampening, and this dial is more for aggressive whoops or washboard roads, or basically when you're just going fast and the shocks are compressing at a high speed. For my older race series shocks, neither the fronts nor rears had DSC, and the front didn't even have remote reservoirs. So having all of these features in my front shocks now will be really awesome. And of course, I can't forget to mention this, but I do love the way these shocks look. I love their design. Visually, they are very appealing. You know, I'm not sure if anyone buys a set of shocks specifically for their looks, but I have to give Fox credit because these are going to look so good on my Tacoma. Okay, I think it's finally time for me to get onto the install, so let's get into it. For context, while I'm doing this install, I picked up right where I left off on my uninstall video, which I'll have linked down below. I recommend you check that out if you want to be caught up with how I remove the shocks first. Also, for both the front and rears, I'm just going to be showing you one side of the install because from side to side, it's identical. Alright, so now it's time to install the new shocks, and what I want to show you guys is these shocks are labeled, so the passenger side is the right side and that's what we're starting on. I'm going to remove these nylock nuts, but have them handy so that we can thread them through just by hand so the top part of the shock will stay in place. So now I'm going to put the new shock in, and it's going to be a little trickier than the old shock. I'm going to try going through the top over here since there's the reservoir. Take my washer and one of my nylock nuts. Sorry you guys can't see, but I'll show you in a second. I guess I'll do at least 2 before I let go. All right, so sorry that was a little bit difficult from the camera angle I had to see what I was doing, but I was basically adding the washer and nylock nut that came with the Fox kit for the upper shock mount. And I basically just hand tightened them in. So there's 2 in the front and 1 in the back, obviously, just like the old shock. So I'm going to tighten up these 3 top bolts just so the shock raises a little bit, so that when I swing the lower control arm, at least the shock will be a little bit more in place. And I'm using a 17mm socket for that. The shock is now up and in place mostly, so I can now swing the lower control arm back in place. All right, so now I'm going to lower the jack slowly and kind of align the rotor and spindle into place on the lower control arm. Now I'm going to take the 2 bolts that basically hold the spindle to the lower control arm. I'm going to add some red Loctite to them. So now to mount the reservoir, we're actually going to use a mount that was provided in the Fox kit. However, we do have to temporarily take off this sway bar spacer because this bracket is going to sit between it and the frame. So there are just 2 14mm bolts we need to remove. Now the way that this reservoir bracket mounts is it goes in between the spacer, and you're actually supposed to use this hole, which right now the cover just mounts to with a plastic clip. So I'm just going to remove that. You can see there's a hole right here in the frame, and then I'm going to put my reservoir bracket between the frame and the spacer and add my 2 14mm bolts back into place. And now I'm going to take the provided bolt from the Fox kit and thread that through to give extra support to this reservoir bracket. Okay, so now for the fun part, we are going to be mounting the remote reservoir. So it's gonna mount just like this. And something else that's also new with these shocks or this shock kit is basically before, or at least for my factory race series shocks, Fox had hose clamps that they provided to mount the reservoirs. Now they actually provide these nice little black metal pieces. Next, I reconnected the sway bar link to the spindle. So now I'm going to be torquing the 2 bolts that go into the spindle to 118 foot-pounds. Now onto the lower control arm pivot bolt. I'm torquing this to 135 foot-pounds. Then, since I can't get my torque wrench on this other pivot bolt on the lower control arm, I'm gonna just do my best to wrench tighten this. The lower shock bolt is going to be 61 foot-pounds. The sway bar link is going to be 52 foot-pounds. Per the Fox instructions, these 3 upper bolts are supposed to be torqued to 24 foot-pounds. I can't get my torque wrench on the last one over here, but I can see that the number of threads is about the same as these front 2, so this is the best I can do for now, and 24 foot-pounds isn't that much, honestly. Just like what I did for the fronts, for the rears, I'm continuing where I left off in my uninstall video. Alright, so now I've got my new Performance Elite Fox shock, and I'm going to add a washer, a bushing, and then the other washer, bushing, and then of course, nut at the top is going to go after we mount the shock. So now I'm going to add the other bushing, washer, and of course, nut at the top. I'm gonna take my 19mm wrench and actually tighten down this top nut a little bit more, because right now it's kind of difficult to get the lower shock mount in place. So now that we can see about 1/4 to maybe 1/2 inch of thread showing, I'm going to start to work on the lower shock mount. Okay, so right now I'm gonna get my lower shock mount between these two tabs right here. Sorry if it's hard to see. I'm gonna try using my mallet and seeing if I can mallet it in place. Okay, you guys, one of the most difficult things about this side was really getting this lower shock mount to fit between these two tabs. I had to move the camera away for a little bit because I was trying a couple different techniques. You might have seen me use the alignment bar, but what ended up working best for me was I sprayed a ton of penetrating oil using my mallet and my alignment bar, and I just did my best to wedge this in. So now I'm gonna put the lower shock bolt back through. I can start to feel it with my other hand. Now I'm gonna put the washer and nut on the other side, and I'm gonna hold one side with my breaker bar, and I'm gonna take my ratchet wrench to tighten down the nut. So the last thing to do before we torque all of our bolts here is basically to mount the remote reservoir. Now the nice thing is I already have a remote reservoir bracket, because as you guys may have seen, my previous shocks had reservoirs and the bracket is the exact same. So just like how I pretty much mounted the reservoirs in the front, the rears are going to be mounted pretty much in the same way. Now the last thing I need to do is basically torque all my bolts. Now, since you can't get a torque wrench on this upper shock nut, Fox says that if you have 5/8 of an inch of stem showing at the top, you are good. So we're just going to do that and then measure. So that's just over 1/2 inch, so I think we're perfect on that. Then the last thing is torquing the lower shock bolt to 43 foot-pounds. And we're basically done with the rear shock. Now let's put the wheel and tire back on and lower the truck. I forgot to show you guys this in the video, but make sure you torque your rear wheels as well. So I did want to show you guys the height in the front and rear of my truck now that the shocks are installed, but I wanted to add a couple of disclaimers. One, I measured only after a 10-minute test drive in this video, so the new springs in the front haven't really settled yet, but I can tell you that after driving this for a week, and I've been trying to like hit potholes and bumps as much as I can to break them in, the fronts did lower by about 1/4 inch from these measurements I'm about to give you. Two, when I filmed this, I did not check my tire pressures, so while I think they're close to even, I can't be 100% sure. And three, even though I show you my measuring tape in these clips, I was doing this with one hand, so you might see me sometimes accidentally angling the tape or not holding the end close to the center of the wheel. Basically, what you see on camera might not reflect the numbers I put on the screen because I remeasured correctly afterwards. So measuring from the center of the wheel to the bottom of the fender flare, the rear passenger measured to be 21 inches. The rear driver was 20.7 inches. The front passenger was 21.4 inches. And the front driver was 21.4 inches as well. So after a week of on-road driving, the front did remain about 0.2 inches higher than the rear, but visually, I personally can't really tell the difference and they might settle even a little more. Keep in mind, I also have this deck system, which I think is like 200 to 300 pounds of extra weight, depending on how much stuff I have back here. So that could be that 1/4 inch compensation, but I don't think this thing weighed down the rear too much. Either way, those are the heights in the front and the rear. Overall, pretty level. So I definitely want to know what you guys think about the new suspension setup on my truck in the comment section down below. What kind of videos would you like to see? What sorts of questions do you have? I'd be really excited to make more videos about these shocks for you guys. If you were following along for the install, I hope it was helpful. Again, feel free to leave me questions in the comment section down below if you have questions about the installation. Overall though, it's been quite a long day of me installing all 4 shocks, so I'm gonna end this video here. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to connect more with me, you can follow me on my Instagram. It is at ChloeKuoTaco. I post more on there in real time. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!